Hello, hello, hello. A lot of familiar faces. So today's discussion is really, I'm hoping that it is going to be great. Before we proceed with the real topic, the real issue, let's get a round of introduction. Ladies first.
I introduce myself? Great. I'm Maria. I'm co founder and CEO of Weaver Labs. We are a telco startup working on a software product called SalesTack. What SalesTack allows is to automate the deployment of private networks, particularly cellular infrastructure, and creates kind of like an integrated compute platform where you can deploy telco specific workloads and any type of application. Most of our work is in the context of Open RAN, which means the open architecture for radio access network, which brings the kind of new architecture for 5G. And yeah, my background is telecoms, and I find it super exciting. And and excited to have a chat today with you guys.
Awesome. Welcome. Who goes next?
I guess I'll go. So I'm Andrew Alithi. I'm CEO and founder of Carrier One. So we are a mobile network operator that is based out of Toronto and also Miami. And so what we've been building out is networks that are open as well, similar to what Maria was saying. And for us, what we've been doing is we're deploying phone numbers, eSIMs, connectivity in multiple different ways, 4G, 5G, and also Wi-Fi access for offloading. And so we've been growing out that network and working with other mobile network operators. We have a collaboration agreement with AT&T in order to offset their traffic wherever it's needed. And then we also have gone international. So we have deployments of Wi-Fi and then certain licensed spectrums that we control and own as Carrier One. And that's what we have.
Beautiful. It's always difficult to choose between Merlin and the DePIN cat. So who goes
the
first?
cat goes first. Come on.
Okay.
I'm Emmanuel, aka the DePIN cat. I'm on the World Mobile team. We are a mobile network operator. We operate in the US, Pakistan, and Zanzibar officially, and then have a network across other countries as well, including parts of Africa, and proof of concepts almost everywhere in the world, on every continent in the world, not everywhere in the world. We are, our whole model is about decentralizing access to set up your own mobile network operation. So we provide a platform that effectively allows anyone to buy the infrastructure that they need to connect a community and earn rewards for that. So far, we have connected 2 million daily active users, which are, I can announce here, will be going on chain in the next 12 to 48 hours. So that's a significant moment for us. We're bringing real world users who are just paying for internet and cellular on chain. And my background is more the crypto side. So the past, I think 2 years now, I've really learned a lot about telecoms and fallen in love with this industry too. So happy to see the two brought together.
Congrats, man. Those are some number crunching statements, isn't it? Oh my God, I love to see them traction comes to projects.
Yeah, that's the amount of farmers you would like to have, or 2 million. That would be a good start. So yeah, my name is Merlin. I am the head of strategy of ArcGreen Network. And ArcGreen Network is mainly infrastructure network with a big vision to decentralize energy in different forms and shapes, which goes into basically starting from solar panels, making and monetizing that energy with an additional DePIN layer, or also fractionizing it so other users can invest into solar on someone's roof, bringing it into remote areas. But we also do consumption tracking via smart plug. We even soon launch one of the heaviest DePIN devices I think the community has seen, was rocking 160 kilograms, which is a house battery DePIN device. And recently, we're also thinking about energy balancing via compute. So we're even dabbling in the realms of Bitcoin mining and AI compute. So it's rather extensive, but the big picture idea is we decentralize energy in different ways and forms.
Awesome, awesome. I have some story as well, isn't it? So, and it's amazing when we started working on a Malaysian palm plantation, 2,000 hectares for the time being. That we are expecting that it is going to be expanded it to 600,000 hectares. And one thing in palm plantation you need is precision, because these are some of the sensitive plantation areas and huge. So humanly, it's impossible for you to go and manage individually. So what happens? You invite technology quite easily, because palm plantation also gives good rewards for the farmers, right? So what we are trying to do is basically use drones, soil sensors, micro weather solutions to bring precision into your nutrients, pesticides, even major the soil for components, and as well as its wetness, right? So when you manage so much of these things using technology, you think like maybe like a few years back, you would probably think that using drones for agriculture is futuristic, right? But the future is now. But all these things, whether you are using GNSS, or you're using drones, soil sensors, micro weather platforms, do whatever, these cannot function without data connectivity. And it just makes telecom so relevant. But I also, while working with this solution, I also felt that there are a lot of misconceptions around telecom in the remote areas. So I would give the mic to you guys to give your opinion. What are some of the things you have observed?
Guess
In
I
terms of the
can go.
misconception, you mean?
Yes, in remote areas particularly.
Well, I mean, remote and not remote. I think the biggest misconception that exists from the general public when it comes to networks is that it's it's just given for granted, right? That someone will just build it. And that, well, but like, and most of the times when we're just talking to like either investors or, partners, it's like, well, but surely there is a network there. It's like, well, no, there's not. So I guess the biggest misconception by the general public is that, well, there is already someone thinking about it, and that someone will go and build it. And that's usually what happened in left behind areas, so remote areas, but not only remote areas, like even like stadiums don't have connectivity, right? And they are not remote. They have thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people. Is the opposite. But yeah, it's just like there are some areas that people are just like, yeah, surely someone is thinking about it. And they're like, well, not really.
Yeah. And then from my perspective,
Somewhere when I was asking for connection to a farm, someone said satellite is the only option. Um, I would take that question to DePIN Cat. Is that a big misconception?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest notice that I've had when I've been talking about like what we've done in Zanzibar, for example, or what we're doing in like Malawi, Kenya, is that they might not have access to the internet, but they can call someone. And actually, like there is literally in these places that we've been into, there is literally no connectivity at all. Like you go into these places and that you cannot call emergency services, you cannot, nothing is connected basically. And yeah, that was an eye opener, because as Maria says, in the UK and the West, we kind of take that for granted. But then for instance, in the UK, when we travel city to city, we are disconnected. We're disconnected so quickly, but it happens so quickly that we don't realize that for some places, this is entire areas bigger than the UK itself. So yeah, that's a massive one.
Fortunately, our new Minister for Digital travels a lot in train and has realized that trains need uninterrupted networks. And it's now a priority in the political agenda to connect railways. But interestingly enough, in the area of Yorkshire, not very remote, considering that it's the UK and it's a thriving economy, there is a very big problem with suicide because of solitude of farmers. And there was a huge investment in a 5G project to solve that problem, because obviously farmers go out in the field to work. Most of the work now is done by the machinery. So they literally just sit in a machine the whole day and have no access to the internet. And they feel really, really lonely. And then the suicidal rates were going up because of that.
From our perspective, when it comes down to like misconception with connectivity, people in the world really don't realize that 1/3 of the world's not connected. And that's a surprising factor to hear from like many different people around the world. And then when we talk to VCs, every VC we've talked to has always said, well, isn't there connectivity everywhere? And sometimes you'll see spotty coverage like 3G access. You'll find edge access, for instance, in certain different countries. So building on that network is an important factor, especially like whoever has access to internet, and we think this is a human right, is being able to, flourish with the rest of the world. If you don't have access to good internet, are you really doing anything? Probably not. You're probably kind of sitting there without any clue of what's going on in the world. So we want to be able to provide internet access worldwide and connect that 1/3 of the connected, just like the unbanked.
Yeah, and I feel like that is a huge opportunity as well that people don't realize exists, because connectivity is dominated by billion-dollar companies, maybe 3 or 4 in every single country. People think it's a done industry they can't get into, but with 2.6 billion people unconnected, you could literally replicate China Telecom, and China Telecom still exists. So there is a massive opportunity there for VCs, and it's great when you sort of explain that. They're like, okay, wow. So how are you going to do it?
Yeah, and especially with the way telecom builds out, it's like they build up from the center of the mass population and they build outwards. They don't really care about what's on the outside. So when we look at it from our perspective from DePIN, is having communities build the outside inwards means that you can actually work with the telecoms and build out an even stronger network.
But I mean, in my experience, working with the telcos is almost impossible. I mean, Andrew, you guys have managed to get a partnership with AT&T, which is,
you have to have a lot of like patience. Like telecoms, they work very slow. I've been in the telecom industry for the longest time, and it really, they don't want to change anything that works today, right? If it works and they're deploying and they have customers and subscribers, there's no need to do anything different as long as they keep subscribers. And they're looking at the cost model. So they're looking at the most cost effective. Doesn't mean that you're skipping out on the little tiny rural areas. It just means that they're not as cost effective as, say, for instance, an urban area with like millions and millions of people. So they're just it just comes down to a cash flow, capex, and a couple other things. But when you go to a telecom and you say, we want to work with you, and here's how we can actually make your model a lot better. Here's how we can, increase your subscribership, increase the ARPU, which is like your user revenue per user. You literally get the telecoms on board listening. And then you have to have like for instance, it's a closed industry. So there's a lot of closed doors. There's a lot of people behind it, but people really do talk to each other in the background. And it's a very small knit community. Everyone knows each other. So as long as you have somebody on the inside of a telco that is understanding your project and fighting for you on the inside, you'll get somewhere with the telcos. And it's not that they won't work with you. It's just they don't want, they're scared of security. They're scared of their subscribers having no connectivity or no access. So if they're going to work with you, you have to guarantee all this stuff.
Yeah, from our perspective, like the experience we had in terms of deploying, we are no mobile carrier ourselves. We just go to solutions and say, does it work there? Okay, then we do a deal with you. But learning from that, like my perspective on this is that people often assume it's like only a technological issue or a matter of infrastructure, because at best, after the question of connectivity, they think, is there even electricity? Can I even reach that place with a street to bring them new routers, whatever? But I think there's some things that are often overlooked in the connectivity issue, which are more deeply human, I learned. And it's like, when you go to a very remote and rural area specifically, which is interesting to connect, then it's purposely because of a cause. So either it's a social cause or it's like farmers and stuff like that, where it's really a matter of importance. And there you have to suddenly deal in very rural, not yet connected areas with cultural dynamics or trust barriers, even digital literacy of people there. And then always a big problem is, the better the technology you bring them, the more you have to care to make them digital literate or to have maintenance capacity there, like to have those things always up and running. Because like sometimes people only think, oh, there's a problem, let's pick a company and throw some money on it. But do they really think the long-term thing of this? And if you really want to start to deploy infrastructure for internet and mobile access somewhere, suddenly the people like to use it. And you have to already have the phase 2 in mind. Like, what if you planned this for 100 people there? What would it look like in 2 years? Maybe 500 or 1,000 people need it there. And there's so much that I am very happy that we as a company can work specifically with professionals to do the part from the connectivity part.
So you're saying, like, on top of, let's say, we call telecom as the base layer of infrastructure, you need to build other things around it. Because if you don't give, say, device access, because I was traveling in Indonesia, I found a lot of dead zones, as Mario was saying, like a lot of dead zones in, it looks like an affluent society, but still little bit just outskirts of that, you will see dead zones. And because I always use motorcycles, so it's easier for me to find out dead zones when you lose connections, right? And it's so crazy. Do you think that telecom companies think that these underserved areas are expensive to venture into? Do you think that's what they think? Or there is something behind it? I would love to know
Yeah,
from
I
you
mean,
guys, because you are the
yeah,
telecom expert.
it's a basic return on investment calculation that they're doing there. I mean, look, if you're deploying infrastructure, it costs so much to set that infrastructure up, and it costs so much to run it. And so you have to make sure that it's not going to be 150 years before you get a return, and the people there can afford to pay that ongoing maintenance and cover your costs. That is the basic thing. I think what decentralization allows, and this is why I believe in the model of decentralization in every industry really, it allows you to enable individual companies or individual people who want to see a neighborhood or community they want to connect, and connect them using the latest technology, focusing on that area in particular. Using a lean team, so they're not AT&T thinking about the model they apply to the USA. Is it going to work in Zanzibar? They just focus on Zanzibar, and what that does, it brings the capex down, it brings the maintenance costs down, and it allows you to connect fewer people for the same cost and still make that same return. So 10 years, 5 years, whatever it is. So that is what I think. That's what I think that the telco calculation is there. And then, yeah, when it comes to that ecosystem as well, like, I'm absolutely right. Like, if you're connecting someone for the first time, they are not going to be digitally literate. They're not going to have the hardware there to access connectivity in a proper way. So, for example, what we did in Kenya when we connected a remote school in Kenya very recently, we gave that school tablets, and then we onboarded Giggle Academy, so CZ's Giggle Academy, to provide education for that school. So it's 3 different companies working together to fulfill one whole thing. And I think, going back to that decentralized model, that's what's going to drive that. Decentralized model is going to drive that, because you've got individuals thinking about what that community needs, rather than thinking about replacing a tried and made entry model for hardware that they've done somewhere else. So yeah, it's
or at least in some proactive communities that they feel that access to data connectivity is important for them, and they approach either a DePIN provider or a telecom company, or the DePIN provider feels that in this community there is a need which the telecom company for some reason is not seeing it. For example, like Maria's case, if she thinks that this particular event or say stadium requires connectivity, and that's not coming under the telecom company's priority list, then why not venture into it, right?
Well, it's about the value, the definition of value, and the definition of value and what my customer wants is different from the perspective of a big telco that is going to look at it from a macro perspective and covering the maximum geography possible, because they pay a lot of money for the spectrum license, which means that they need to use it everywhere. And then the definition of value for a stadium owner, or a local community, or a combined authority in the UK, or it doesn't have to be a remote area, is very different, right? So when we were working with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, which is an area in the north of the UK, the definition of value is we want to attract skills. And digital skills are the first thing, right? And then, well, we need to invest in advanced wireless connectivity for everyone. And social housing was a big investment area, because much like rural communities, areas that are not wealthy do not get connectivity either, right? So I'm right now sat in Shoreditch, which is a really hip area of London, but before, 10 years ago, was not. So what happened? There's 0 fiber networks built in this area, 0. So it's really, as a business, it's really hard now that the area is developed to get connectivity. So because the definition of value is different for a stadium owner, for a local community, decentralization helps to open up ownership, right? That's ultimately what it does, right? So I can be a local entrepreneur from Kenya or Zimbabwe, or I can be Weaver Labs and say, I'm going to go and take on the challenge of building this network. And what big telco needs to do, they need to work with us, because the internet is a network of networks. So they need to open up those assets that they have, such that we can go the last mile, because that's what we're doing. We're just covering the last mile. But yet I need to connect to a fiber link that gets me out of there, right? Or that satellite link that you were talking about before. They need to come in at some point, because this is global infrastructure, right? We're not talking about islands of connectivity. Yes, decentralization can cover those islands of connectivity, but ultimately we need everything to be connected via a fiber network or a wireless network that brings the data from A to B. So incentives need to exist also for companies like big telco, big carriers, or MNOs, to open up those assets in a way that the business model is still valid for the local entrepreneur.
Correct.
Because what happens for example, in the African market, well, DePIN Cat will know a lot more than me about that, but what happens is that if I want to cover a local community and I need to go to American Towers to put my macro base station up there, that destroys my business model completely. Ben Roberts, who is a fantastic person who used to work for Liquid, once gave a presentation, which is the cost of a gigabit. And he broke it down beautifully and explains where the business model breaks, and it is actually there. It is, yes, we can bring decentralization, we can bring the power to the local communities, and we can bring the power to the people, but ultimately those radios need to go up somewhere, and the fiber needs to exist. So we need them also at some point to work with us.
What I agree with what Maria says, and but there is also a danger in being in that loop where you would struggle to come out of, whether chicken comes first or egg comes first scenario, right? And we have seen that prior, like a few years back when India was going into a digital drive, there was almost a lot of dead zones, almost like 56% and odd of the villages were not connected, right? And the government was planning to give them digital banking. So people were actually laughing at the government. But because the government dreamt, today it is 100% connected. You would find absolutely no village which is not connected. So the value system what Maria is talking about is derived because there is some intent as well. Like there is some incentive. Here, of course, this incentive, government feels that it is a responsibility towards the citizen, but at some point of time, that incentive also has to flow down to these private companies or private DePINs to inherit from the value system we create. Some value has to come to them as well, right?
Mhm. You know what?
Yeah, and
I agree with all that. I think what's going on right now is, like, for instance, in the US and Canada, there's incentivification that happens from the government to telcos. Telcos will get X amount of dollars to deploy networks in rural locations. And that's a big thing. Like, it actually helps out, almost like DePIN, where we incentivize people with tokens. But the issue is the telcos don't have enough resources, especially now since most of the actual model has changed over the last 10 years for telcos. So telcos used to make lots of money, an enormous amount of money, and they were able to deploy and they were able to do all that. But now the capex has stayed the same, but the amount of money that they're getting per user has dropped significantly. And it's all because telcos rely on roaming agreements to make a lot of money on the excess point of view. And back then we used to charge out per minute. If you remember, phone calls used to charge out per minute. We used to charge out
yeah.
per megabyte, not per gig, but per megabyte. And now we have this whole new model where it's unlimited calling, unlimited text messages, unlimited data. And we're looking at the ARPU changing completely, where the user's now looking for cheaper phone plans. So they're starting to drive the model out where now it's pennies instead of dollars. And so that's why a lot of the telcos, they reserve a lot of the infrastructure changes. So you'll find rural areas with like 3G connectivity, which is not that fast. It's absolutely, like, compared to what we're doing, and especially with the data model that's going on today, and all the people watching videos, uploading videos, all that stuff is a cost to the user, but a cost to the telco. So the telco only looks at upgrading areas where they have larger population as the first and foremost. So almost like I said before, it's like they're building outwards. We got to build from the outside in, and they're okay with us doing the last mile for those outside ins. So for them, we are their last mile in terms of getting those communities connected. And what we could do is we work with them by saying, hey, the foremost thing for them is security. They want to make sure that, the user's data is secure, that no one's hijacking any of the information that happens between them and, let's say, a website that they're logging into. They want to make sure of that 100% all the time. And so we got to give that assurance for that last mile.
Yeah, our driver. We're all sitting in the bus. This is the driver.
There is a year or so back, I was speaking to one of the telecom regulatory authority. One of these younger executive had told me that give another few years, you would probably not see a pure telecom company. And when Andrew was speaking, I was correlating that, because if you switch your business model on subscription, what Mario was saying about the value system remains fixed, whereas your technology is moving faster. So how would you catch up? Where is your investment coming from, right? Because your subscriptions are limited and it is very population dependent, right? And so you focus on concentrated areas rather than looking at this holistic view of let the world be connected, right? So what he said is, if you give another couple of years, you will see that there will be thin line between telecom and banking, telecom and in other services, and that's where probably the value system will come from. And then a year or so back, we were asked by a telecom companies, hey, we are venturing into payment. Like, interesting. And
Isn't it Revolut that has
Well, there's-
launched their own MVNO
Well,
yesterday
actually,
or so?
there's a bunch of them. There's so
Yeah.
M-Pesa Pay. If you're from Africa, you know M-Pesa Pay, right?
Yeah.
With a phone number, you could literally send money, and this is the thing. We're in crypto, so we could do the same thing, and that's what we've been doing over at Carrier One, is like building that model out. But at the same time, it's you're looking at a way different model. There's a lot of MVNOs coming out. There's a lot of virtual network operators who are just like, here's an eSIM, here's a SIM, here's a phone number, here's some data, and that's that. So I have a feeling we're decoupling the technology from the mobile network operator. And eventually what will happen is the mobile network operator should worry nothing about CapEx. They shouldn't worry about deploying. And at some point, I'm hoping that spectrum itself will be released to everybody to use at the same time and be able to create all these networks, because we have all this technology like MOCN, which allows you to actually have multiple networks off the same radio. And you're able to do that on one single spectrum, and everyone can share it. So the huge issue is, like, for instance, one mobile network operator like AT&T might have two bands of spectrum in a given region, and whereas T-Mobile might have 4 spectrums. So remember, spectrums are different sizes that are deployed. But at the end of the day, we can all share that. We can all deploy, and they don't have to worry about anything but the subscribers, because that's the model we're moving towards, is just virtual network operators.
I mean, yes, I agree with that, but still MVNOs rely on a centralized ownership of infrastructure, right? It's very much the non-monopolistic model of, I'm going to allow others to exploit my infrastructure because otherwise I'm in a monopoly, right? So the government needs to enforce that kind of like plurality in terms of service providers, but ultimately they all ride on centrally owned telco infrastructure, which is still like, I'm on an MVNO that rides on O2, right?
Yeah.
And that decoupling of service provisioning and infrastructure ownership, I do see that is happening, but it is happening in a very slow way. And they are moving to what it's called the neutral host providers and these neutral infrastructure providers. And those guys, what they do is they build the Airbnb of networks, right? So they build a network, and then they say, here I am. Most of them implement MOCNs or JOTs or something that allows to share the infrastructure, and that's that. The problem is that their investment model, the investment model of these neutral hosts, is the same, because they want to be appealing to the crown jewels, who are the mobile network operators. So now there is a chain of trust that is going from large telco. Okay, I don't really want to be CapEx heavy on a city center. I'm going to go and relay my investment into a neutral host. They're going to do the small cell deployment. Great. These guys are looking for an anchor tenant, which means it's not built first and then they come. It's, I'm going to first lock in a customer and then going to go and build. So the investment model is still very much the same. And when it comes to the areas that are left behind, they're not touching those either. They're saying like, well, I'm not going to get any customers to use this network. So there you go. I'm not really going to invest in rural areas because none of my customers who are the MNOs are interested in using this infrastructure. So the world that I think we should be trying to, and I think everyone in this virtual room is trying to do, but outside of this virtual room and inside of the telco industry, is true decentralization of the ownership. And not just like, I'm going to build a network because I'm actually acting as the company that installs the radio, but actually, you know, I'm just building it on behalf of Vodafone, which is what the neutral host is doing. But rather, I'm going to build this network, and I'm going to open up this infrastructure to whoever wants to operate it.
Yeah.
And that means that we open up the world to hundreds and hundreds of operators that are not virtual, that are real operators operating over infrastructure that is shared. And then you can have operators that just give service to, I don't know, smart cars or traffic lights. They will just do that. That's their only service. Not just like, and then you get 100 of specialized operators that ride on shared infrastructure. But I do agree with your point, Andrew, on spectrum. Without that, this model is impossible.
Unfortunately, I don't think the spectrum situation is going to change anytime soon, simply because it's a government monopoly and it's it's a thing they can just use to raise money. However, I am, what Maria just said is the world mobile model. So Andrew, you were asking earlier, or I think Maria, you were asking earlier about how to get the big telcos to talk. And, Andrew, you made some great points about, being in the room with them, you've got to offer them something. So our model is very, very simple. We go to telcos and say, you've deployed this infrastructure in X country, you've spent so much on CapEx, onboard it to our platform, and we will resell the part of the operation of that infrastructure to a community of base station operators, radio operators, who will earn a portion of every single piece of revenue that goes through that infrastructure. So that does two things. It brings money into the system so that those telcos that have deployed that infrastructure get the return on the infrastructure they've deployed a lot quicker, and therefore can go and expand it in other areas or can upgrade the network. And the second thing, it allows, as Maria was saying, it allows that air node operator, we call them air nodes, they're base stations, everyone here is telco, so I can just say that. It allows that air node operator sat in his room to operate one base station that is connecting a house and 5 neighbors. And we have 300 of them so far, and we believe that is the model going forward. So when I say we've got 2 million daily users, most of those users actually are coming from Pakistan, where we've done this with an existing telco called WellCallTel. They've laid fiber cable in Islamabad and Lahore, and now they're going into every single business. Well, I say every single business, but they're going into a lot of businesses and residences, installing consumer premises equipment that connects to that fiber backhaul and provides that connectivity into those areas. Then those consumer premises equipment are being bought by our air node operators. Some might be in LA, some might be here in the UK, some might be in France. They're earning a reward from that, a small portion of the reward. Some of the reward is going to World Call, some of the reward is going to World Mobile. And with that funding that's gone in, they're then going and laying down and attracting more customers, laying down more infrastructure, more cables, and putting more of those CPEs into homes in Pakistan. So that is the model that I think is going to be the future. Naturally, I'm biased towards our mobile, but replicating that, amongst all telcos, going to AT&T and saying, hey, look, you've got however much of the US connected. We're gonna literally upfront pay for 10% of that. Then that money with us, we're going to deploy to Reno. That is, we've deployed in Reno. That is very badly connected, or the Midwest, or whatever. I don't know my my American geography as much as the UK or Yorkshire, which I am based in, so I know that very well. And yeah, we can now the capex that you've spent on that is lower than it would have been, and therefore the rewards, the revenue that you can generate from connecting fewer people gives you about the same ROI that you would have had if you did it in a major city. So yeah, that's the model really.
Do you also see that the relationship between the telecom and the decentralized telecom infrastructure, for lack of any other words, are not going to be binary anymore? Like they will be interdependent in that case. So anyone who's have air node or the base station can actually.
Yeah, I mean,
Do you
I
see
mean,
that?
yeah, as you know, they are already interdependent. Like, no telco exists in an island simply because, you know, you have to. If I want to make a call from the UK to the US, there's lots of different telecoms companies that have different infrastructure and different software, all talking to each other at the same time. So that principle is already there. It's just as Maria said, it's connecting that last mile and making that last mile more palatable for a business sense. And that can be done by getting me as an individual, say, who doesn't have anticipation of becoming a billionaire or going public, but earning maybe, you know, a couple dollars a month, saying, hey, I'll pay for that base station there so I can earn that $10 a month. And that brings more money into the system. And I think that is regardless of the argument for decentralization, the receptiveness to that is that, hey, I'm spending less on capex. And that's the biggest expense for any telco.
Yeah, I mean,
or at least towards the shared economy. In our case, for example, we definitely need data connections in remote or underserved areas, right? And that is required for agriculture. But what about the community, right? But if there is a common infrastructure, then we all can share that, right? Yeah, Andrew, you were saying something, sir.
Yeah, so I mean, we got lucky that we have Spectrum. We own Spectrum full right out, purchased it during an auction. And we've had over 25 years plus of experience in telecom, being able to, you know, kind of see the growth of it over the last like 25 years. So I think for our perspective, it's the cost of actually deployments too as well, right? So when you're looking at deploying a 5G cell in a given area, and let's say you have a 64 T by 64 R antenna, so you have like 64 range and all this other stuff, it's expensive. It's going to come up to almost $300,000 just to deploy that one cell site in some instances, because you have to put the monopole up, you have to put a tower, you might even look at renting, because renting is a lot cheaper than putting up a $100,000 tower. The infrastructure, putting out the building outside, like a little tiny shack building, to be able to put all the infrastructure, including the power, it's expensive. So we looked and turned to like America Tower. We turned to like different providers for tower companies in the US. And we started realizing, you know, the expensive part is asking the community to put together money together to buy a tower or to buy the cellular equipment to service their community is expensive. And I think the thing is, we have to ask governments to start stepping up a little bit more, because they'll end up giving billions and billions of dollars to telcos to help do this, but they don't look at the smaller guys like in the DePIN space in order to deploy this. So, I mean, without any funding, without any help, it becomes a harder model to even go to the mobile network operators and say, hey, we're running a true, you know, GSMA approved, you know, model, and we have all the backbone and everything that we need to have to get everything running. That's the hard part. So when it comes down to talking to mobile network operators, they're looking for the security, they're looking for all the information, making sure that you have, you know, proper handover. They're looking to make sure you have all that stuff built into what you're building out. So using just any kind of base station doesn't really always work out, and the mobile network operators want to know what base station you're using. So I would like to see, you know, what in the future, if we can work with more of the municipalities, other villages. Like I know we work with municipalities in Canada. We work with native territories, and the native territories, they love deploying because they have the poorest infrastructure whatsoever. We have issues in all those territories, and for us, what we want to do is build out communities where the communities can invest into it. They can ask money from the government. And a lot of the telcos, they don't even enter those villages or even the smaller towns, because it's not in their best interest to deploy that.
In one way, if you look at, like, there are some restrictions like spectrums and other government regulatory framework that slows things down. In another way of looking at some of the positive things, which are like, you know, investment flow and community awareness, so that the general infrastructure can be built. We need to strike balance between these two, right? What would you do differently if the restrictions from government isn't there at all? And we wouldn't go to the second part, but what would you have done different?
I'm scared if there's no restrictions, to be honest. There needs to be a little bit of restrictions. But if there was no restrictions, like we would have spectrum that's being used by everybody, and we would have a chaotic connectivity in the entire world. We have no connectivity actually for that happen. But there's a reason why we have those restrictions. The restrictions I would remove though would be more towards some of the regulatory where they make it impossible to become a MNO. They make it harder unless you have a lot of money behind you, a lot of backing, and that you're able to buy spectrum. I think that they should make it easy where the mobile network operators have to work with the smaller guys. It's a thing in Canada where, the CRTC, for instance, they say that an MVNO can work with the mobile network operators and can operate with the mobile network operators, but it's not forced. So, for instance, if I have a radio and I have spectrum, they are forced to work with us. So then we become an MNO, and because we're an MNO, they have to allow us onto their network. So there's a trade-off that I think the regulators, both in any country whatsoever in the world, they need to kind of look at opening up the doors for everybody, and they need to look at what it would take so that it's not a duopoly or it's not a monopoly on any of the telco, because the incumbents are just thriving just being there. And there's nobody to challenge that. There's no way you can even get to there. I know back in the day when AT&T or Bell Labs, they were separated. They were completely, separated into different companies. And the reason for that is that they ended up having a monopoly on the entire market. But now we're back to the same thing again.
Well, there was a little bit of that with the whole Open RAN movement, right? That it was just like,
yeah,
national dependency on, the small number of vendors should be broken. Let's open up. We need diversity in the marketplace. We need competition, and so on and so forth. And I'm still a huge believer. I'm not going to stop betting for it and investing in it. I will keep building on that, because I truly believe that we need diversification in the supply chain. But when it comes to the delivery of the services, I do agree. Sensible regulation is necessary. And the one thing that I would add to all of that is that regulators need to put operators a test in their adoption of innovation. How much innovation have you actually adopted? I stopped going to conferences because I was genuinely starting to be rude to people, because they would sit in a panel, like chief architect, AT&T, sit in a panel with me in Mobile World Congress and say, we are doing Open RAN. Come on, man. Come on. You just signed a deal with Ericsson. That's not Open RAN. No. I mean, yes, if you say so, but it's just a deployment model. It's not like the actual standards compliant open architecture. So as a regulator, you really need to push operators to be adopting innovation. So you really want to get access to all of these funding that exists to support local communities, or even rip and replace funding now that some geographies have banned certain vendors. Well, show us that you're adopting innovation. Show us that you're actually embracing new commercial models. Show us that you're embracing cloud, software-based architectures. Where is all of that? So aside with the fact that we obviously need to open up spectrum in a very organized way, we can't, like even here in the UK, we do have shared spectrum access, similar thing as what the US has with CBRS. Not as nice as CBRS to access. It's very complicated to get access here, but you can. But I do have like a geographical area where I can transmit my spectrum, and the maximum power, all of that. But we do need to have innovation being pushed from the regulator. Innovation and security principles, the two. Because security by obscurity is a very big problem in telco.
Awesome. I'm gonna jump in quickly because I've got to go in like a minute ago. But yeah, no, I agree with all the points that have been that have been said here, really. I mean, the challenge for us in particular is that we also have the crypto side of it. And whilst that's not been a barrier to acquiring spectrum, licensed spectrum in the US, or using unlicensed spectrum, you know, here in the UK and elsewhere, it is a barrier. It kind of is a barrier when it comes to the crypto side of things. So as we've talked about earlier, telecoms companies in the future aren't just going to be telecoms companies. They're going to need to explore other industries in order to survive, basically, since the ARPU is just going to come way down. And for all of us here, we're exploring the crypto industry. But how can we make that work if we're a licensed telecoms company, but the crypto side is the gray area? So that's something that needs to, I think, be fixed, or even, you know, even in the UK now, we're talking about a sandbox for crypto companies. Maybe there needs to be a sandbox for existing telco companies exploring new industries, and that could be very useful in generating that innovation. But yeah, I have to go now. I'm on the hour, but thank you guys for the conversation, and I'm sure I'll be on here again. And I love seeing Dark Virus using our app. Scan points, get it if you can.
Well, this is good also.
Bro, I'm number 6. I'm number 6. Let's go.
It's
Yeah.
a pleasure talking to you.
See ya.
Thank you, Kat.
Bye.
Okay, see you next time. I want to also have a slightly more radical opinion to represent a little bit the average community and people like me and Dark Virus, which is like, of course, we don't have the experience like that the real network representatives here have. But to answer the question, what would we do differently if governments weren't so much in the picture? I would say we would radicalize, try to decentralize the whole process within some minor safety boundaries, but we would make an attempt to like shift entirely to some permissionless energy and data common system where like ownership, governance, incentives, everything is like in the network, rather than all being intermediated by different politic instances. But that being said, with all reason to it, I think nobody really believes in like working around the government or against the government on this topic. It's more like you have to make a model, a system that somehow at least so compelling to governments that they feel safe adopting it or not threatened and allow it to happen. But a little bit of leeway, and I think this is a very philosophic way to say it, but probably more pragmatic in the direction of what Andrew said about having the access to the different frequencies, like some things that are controlled and are maybe safe to be opened in access to a broader systemic way, that we need to kind of get this explored, because when the mobile companies cannot make the big profit like 10 years ago anymore, to gain the infrastructure, we have to, like, the one approach is from the smaller DePINs to be like the long tail market working back, because like no telco will speak to 1 farmer, 10 farmer, or 100 farmers in a remote area. But if a project like Weaver Labs, Carrier One, if they approach them with a concept for multiple such remote areas, they kind of have the leverage to be a real customer for them and to really go into a meaningful negotiation. And because they offer kind of the last mile deployment of micro infrastructure that makes it appealing for the bigger telco, that's probably the route to go, because we need to connect everything, but on the remote and rural areas, it has a much higher impact effect, because like I am a DePIN maximalist, like Dark Virus, like, and if you think about that, it's a little bit like every DePIN that you can bring into a remote area will bring them money, but what every DePIN needs is infrastructure of connectivity. Like the first thing, debatable if electricity or internet, but even if you have electricity and the devices work, you can't transmit the data. You need the connectivity. And that way you can create huge value in those areas, just like but that's the whole picture, and not so much taking into account how expensive it is for the mobile providers to build the core for the infrastructure.
You made a very valid point, because we have seen that when we went with this 2,000 hectares kind of a proposition, it was easier to be ignored. But then when we say that, hey, but we are experimenting this, and then we will expand to 600,000 hectares, and then the government has given us 3 million hectares. That's a different proposition altogether, right? Then everybody wants to participate in that proof of concept, right? So I think if DePINs are building with multiple places and have the ability to connect, that will create larger impact, and there are more chances for the centralized entities to accept them.
One thing also, sorry I want to follow up, sorry, but one big thing which I noticed, because I am working a lot cross DePINs and cross connectivity things, and one thing that always gets overlooked, because in a way we're trying to work together, but also everyone is firstly fending for themselves and building their business. Like, the one point that is mostly overlooked is the cost of physical deployment when it comes to smaller devices. I'm not speaking about cell towers, but more like for the connectivity networks, those routers and mesh nodes or something, but also for all other DePINs, which have a high localization impact, where I also think about things like RTK services and stuff like that. And when you think about those things, like at first point, the single DePIN device seems rather expensive, and the user will buy it and deploy it on his house. It's all fine. But as soon as you're starting to make this rural area infrastructure focused, then like the cost of the individual hardware goes a little bit into background. But having someone that understands the technology, deploys it somewhere so it works and it is maintained, that can become a super high cost. And this is where I hope that certain DePINs will start to work together, where like you pick someone who doesn't cut into your business, but who has similar deployment requirements. I think also, again, RTK is a good example. You need an antenna on a roof with a stable internet connection. So if you're speaking about a remote area, like RTK and maybe weather sensorics will push them very far in front when they have connectivity. So all those things have a similar installation way, like almost, because even for cell connectivity spread out to Wi-Fi, ideally you don't put it in your basement. So if you're thinking about deploying in some locations, roof, like a lot of things are very similar. The location has to be safe. You don't want things to be stolen. It needs a similar infrastructure of electricity, whatnot ever. So I hope in the next year we see very meaningful partnerships where like certain DePINs work together to cut down those deployment costs and really build something together to really access those remote areas.
It's a lot to take in. I want to kind of go to your point where you were talking about, spectrum and having access to it. I mean, we got kind of lucky in the US where we were able to get a spectrum called CBRS, where, radios would work all together and they would call back home and say, hey, can I basically speak out on the network? And it was a good idea. It worked very well for fixed wireless. There's a couple issues that happened with the mobile network operators where the mobile network operators didn't want to use any CBRS radios. So we had these access to CBRS, but the issue is like the same thing with the regulators, is that you need to have your own spectrum to be able to be considered an MNO. And the issue was is if you had access to CBRS, you can build out your own deployments, you could build out your own network, but it wasn't enough. Like you need to be able to have multiple different spectrums, because you have, a medium to a high density of a spectrum. You need to make sure that you can penetrate walls or go underground, or like it all depended on that. So we were only stuck to a certain size and a certain amount, which was only 20 megahertz that you were allotted. And then your power for your radio or your base station was very low. So I want to see more of that from the government side of things. I want to see the government start to like open up spectrum. Like now in Canada, there's something called an NCL license. The incumbents in Canada are not allowed to be part of that. But however, the incumbents were part of the conversation, which meant that incumbents turned around and said it's a first come, first serve basis. And they were able to vote that in. So I like to see where government starts taking a step forward, because there's a lot of instances where the government's giving out so much money to the MNOs that are incumbents, and they turn around and they do nothing with the money. And then they say they need more money to deploy the rural communities. I think it would be so much better if the government just gave access to spectrum on behalf of the DPIN community, and be able to say, hey, you guys deploy, you figure out your CapEx. We don't have to give you any money, but we gave you spectrum. And I think that might change the field of focus and allow for governments to deploy faster, give opportunities to smaller companies to get in and get their foot in the door. And I think that's the important thing to kind of see from here. But so far for now, I mean, most of the DPIN projects in the space have been serving a use case that exists that they're able to serve that the MNOs are not able to serve currently. So I think it's just moving forward. It's just regulation is super slow, and they don't really see what the small guys are seeing. And I think we need to open up more conversations by having all the DPINs together, approach the regulators and say, why don't you make something for us? Why don't you carve out a little bit of this regulation, allow us to be able to serve communities, allow us to be able to build, become innovative, and that way it will serve a purpose that, you know, a lot of the bigger guys don't really care about, because it doesn't make them money at the end of the day, but it will serve the purpose of building out better infrastructure, better communities. And when you have better communities, better infrastructure, the country grows. Oh. I said
and I was speaking to
I think that what is important also, Andrew, is to have a seat at the table. And the seat at the table in either advisory boards, in those regulators, working with the departments of communications across the globe, influencing policy and making sure that this narrative has a place in these closed doors where these conversations happen is very important. And I do a lot of that for, you know, for the good of the industry and also for the good of the business, right? Because we need to explain government and regulators the benefit of open architectures, and this goes beyond DPIN, right? This is how the internet was built, right? Open architectures, open and interoperable and interchangeable. So we obviously need them to give us a chance, but how do they even know we exist? Because we are here building, but we're not going and saying, hey man, this is what I'm building, and look at the impact that it's generating in all of these communities, and how it translates into benefits that you can then go into treasury or whatever is the organism that gives money, and translate that into policy, right? So there is our duty is also to go and talk to these people.
Yeah, the problem
in
is
Indonesia, when I was speaking to governments initially, and there was like very unclear rules about tokenization, DPIN, and so the first step I suggested them is to have clear guideline for SROs, right? Because self-regulated organizations can be that channel through which other companies can talk to, because government doesn't have awareness and time, and individuals don't know how to whom to approach, right?
Yeah.
So these bodies just fit right there, and then eventually it can evolve to be more like aptly regulated, right? But prior to that, I think SROs are the key things for DPIN and other critical factors expansion.
I think so for us, we have a seat at the table, but the problem is where we're at on the table is at the far bottom of the table. So anything we say doesn't trump a tier 1 mobile network operator when they say something, right? Because they have tons and tons of lobbyists within the government. And then on top of that, any of the regulators, most of the regulators are incumbent C-level or ex-incumbent, directors. And so like what you end up having is a conversation at these tables, but you don't get your point across because the incumbents are like, well, that's not going to work. And they believe the incumbents before they believe you. And that's why I'm saying it needs to go further up than just the regulatory bodies. Like, for instance, like for you to be an MNO and for you to make MNO agreements, you have to be a GSMA member. And
which is a private entity, by the way.
It's a private entity, yes. And it's a group that's basically the boys club. So at the end of the day, you have to get into that. You have to use their standard forms whenever you do anything like roaming agreements and anything like that of thereof. So you're kind of constricted to their rules. And the incumbents are the ones that actually created most of these organizations. So it's really just a control thing. And I think at the end of the day, if we have government buying into this, and they kind of help the innovation move forward, I think then we'll have way better voice than what we currently have today. And I've been to so many of these closed meetings, and I've been trying to talk to different regulators and saying, hey, this is what we want to see happen, and this is how we want to see the industry move forward. We want to see spectrum opened up. We want to see the ability for us to complement and build out networks. At the end of the day, I don't think that the government has on their plate to build out open standard across the board just as of yet, right? And it's only because we haven't really made the clear case to them that there's all this rural areas that don't have connectivity. Like, they don't see that. Majority of the like I said, 90% of the people, they live in urbanized areas. They never see these issues. They don't know what it is like to move up north to the middle of nowhere and you have no connectivity until you get back to the main road and you drive back into town and now you have connectivity. And I don't think they see and assess that. Like, especially up in Canada, we also have a water issue where, some communities don't have good water. Like, a lot of the native territories are having that issue, food, water. Like, you can go up north into Yellowknife and you'll be paying like $15 for bananas that literally cost you $2 when you're back in an urban town. So like, there's that type of issue that's been happening. And I think it needs to be addressed by showing the use cases and saying this is what needs to happen. It needs to come from the government.
You are working on a lot of these last mile communities, and you must have seen what Andrew is saying, that imbalance.
Yeah.
So what's your suggestion to the government? What need to be fixed if you have to just keep it 1, 2, 3 bullet points?
Well, invest in, have a portfolio approach for investment in innovation. That some is going to fail, and it's perfectly fine, but government needs to be the one promoting this innovation that solves key problems. So point number 1, have a portfolio approach to innovation. And point number 2, sensible regulation that allows for competition in the marketplace, being spectrum, access to MNO licenses. And the third point, and I think that one the UK is doing really well, is open consultations. That is not only just closed doors, but for instance, the whole open network architecture and open network program within the UK was born out of the Future Telecoms Infrastructure Review, which was a result of an open consultation that any individual industry could participate. But I think it's more of that what we need.
Awesome.
Yeah,
That's something. You want to add something, Merlin?
Yeah, I try to keep it very short, but my problem is that working with governments, I come from a different angle there, but I have worked in the past with governments about electricity in rural areas, but also air quality in general areas. I have seen a lot, and what was always the common denominator from my experience is government is too slow. Government is too slow, doesn't react, and getting funding is always horrific. But what I noticed is that there are sometimes like priority levels. Like, for example, talking about electricity infrastructure with them or road infrastructure was 100 times easier than air quality demand on a scale. So what I think is maybe the real approach to governments must be in a very organized fashion, because one thing I also like, I got reinforced a little bit from Jörg in the past, but I learned I somehow, with the air quality and electricity topic, I came my first time to the farmers. And suddenly I understood that farmers have a very special kind of spot or leverage with small local governments and municipalities, where they are, as an entity, actually more listened to than those entrepreneurs who say, we need more networks here, or we need more air quality sensors. So because the food is such a crucial demand, that somehow, I think approaching governments has to be like organized with like a high business interest and maybe farmers to push the local municipality, because somehow no one wants to mess with the farmers, and you have to be very smart in the approach. Maybe something can be speed up there, but in general, I'm worried governments are too slow, and as much as possible has to be fractionized in DePIN. And you will easier find 200 random people from the world who are willing to spend $50 on a router that they don't even own, but they get some token for it, and it is deployed in a rural area, that will always work faster than actually talking with a municipality. That's the crazy part.
We are little bit running out of time, so we'll go to Dark Virus to give a summary.
Okay, quick summary. Only people reason big telecoms because like those big companies, AT&T, T-Mobile, is because of they allow you to purchase a phone through a 2-year period. So you're bound to that phone. People don't want that no more. Get out these phones. Definitely. That would just destroy them all. But I think they're starting to finally all kind of get the big picture and start to work together a little. But still a lot of work to do. What else? DePINs are cool. I'm really hot and sweaty, and we're out of time. So I love you.
That was a perfect wrap up.
That's awesome. And as always, you guys are awesome. You make a lot of interesting conversation, give a lot of information to our team to digest, a lot of also understand the inner functioning. And then when we complain, now we can complain with a pinch of salt at least, right? So thank you so much. We'll try to get you guys in again, and it's always pleasure to have you. We'll look forward to having you more. And then peace out. Enjoy.
Hey, take
Thank
care,
you so
everybody.
much. Bye bye.
Have a great
Lovely
day.
discussion.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Safe,
Bye bye.
safe drive, Dark Virus. Bye bye.
Ciao,
Bye-bye.
guys.